Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
Today we're back to nature, and we're talking about some research regarding clams. Clams, of course, here in Taiwan are a delicacy in night markets and things like that. You got hama and la, which are different kinds of clams. But clams are not only for eating, they can serve some scientific purposes as well.
Yeah, I was telling Tom before we started that I was amazed when I read this. I think it's fascinating that clams can actually help keep our water safe, which is amazing. You know, we're so used to high-tech solutions and solving problems with technology. And here we can rely on just these little old clams to help us keep our water clean. They can tell us when the water's dirty. So let's get started. We're going to read through the article first, and then we'll be back to talk about it.
Clean drinking water is something many societies take for granted. Regions with large reservoirs, plenty of rainfall, and enough money to afford purifying technology enjoy drinkable, free-flowing water. Countries that lack such resources can sometimes struggle to provide this basic necessity of life. The Polish city of Poznan has a unique combination of resource problems which are being dealt with in equally unique ways. In particular, the authorities there have been using clams to monitor water quality since 1994. These creatures are ideal for the task because they respond immediately and noticeably to water contamination. Clams keep their shells open to expose themselves to nutrients and close them tight upon detection of toxic substances. The Poznan water treatment facility keeps 8 clams glued to a surface within the water pumps with springs attached to the tops of their shells. When a shell closes, the spring makes contact with a sensor and sends an alert to engineers. When 4 or more clams close at once, the supply is shut off. While the clams are not the only safeguard in the operation, the facility considers this form of biological monitoring a reliable addition to their modern systems. This is because other technology the facility uses isn't always efficient enough to respond to the exceptional types of pollution found in its primary water source, the Warta River. The Warta passes through some of Poland's oldest industrial areas and has had chemicals and other forms of pollution leaking into its waters since the 1800s. The most disturbing concern relates to heavy metals, which continue to seep through the ground and into Poznan's water supply. Depending on conditions, the water quality can vary from drinkable to poisonous throughout the year. A few years ago, the main treatment plant in Poland's capital, Warsaw, began harnessing the clams' special abilities too. The U.S. cities of Minneapolis and Moline are also experimenting with this approach to water monitoring. This animal's usefulness seems to demonstrate that despite our high-tech achievements, humankind will always retain a fundamental connection with nature.
Okay, guys, let's jump in. I love this particular article. I just think it's so cool that clams are able to actually help keep water safe. So clean drinking water is something many societies take for granted. So regions with something called reservoirs and plenty of rainfall and enough money to afford purifying technology enjoy drinkable, free-flowing water. I come from a state that doesn't have a lot of rainfall, which is Arizona. We're in a desert, and so we have a lot of these things called reservoirs. There are different ways to pronounce this word. You can pronounce it reservoir, you can pronounce it reservoir, and you can pronounce it reservoir. I pronounce it reservoir. They're all correct. This is the Merriam-Webster dictionary telling you that. What they are is man-made lakes. So humans actually create these lakes. They have to dam up the water somewhere, and then the water stays in there. And what we use it for typically is for our drinking water.
Yeah, here in Taiwan, of course, we've got the Feitsui Reservoir and the Sherman Reservoir, and I think there are some other ones down south that I don't remember, but in any case, yeah, these areas are regions with large reservoirs and areas with lots of rainfall and enough money to afford purifying technology. Well, those regions enjoy drinkable, free-flowing water. So yeah, they've got enough rain. They can afford technology to purify the water, which means to get rid of all the bacteria and all the bad stuff and make it more pure. And countries that lack such resources can sometimes struggle to provide this basic necessity of life. So yeah, we can do it here in Taiwan, and they can do it in the U.S., except for Flint, Michigan, but most places can purify the water. But in other places, it's more difficult to provide this basic necessity of life. Without water, we have difficulty surviving.
Yeah, we'll often use this phrase, basic necessities of life, to talk about just food, place to live, water is essential, clean air. Hopefully, we keep having clean air. So we've got a Polish city of Poznan, and it has a unique combination of resource problems, which are being dealt with in equally unique ways, truly unique. So what is the problem here? Well, in particular, the authorities have been using clams to monitor water quality since way back in 1994. So this isn't a new technique for them, but it's something I'm just hearing about. I've never heard of this before. When you use this word authorities, and it's always in the plural form, guys, the authorities, there are people that have the power and the right to give you orders or make decisions or tell you what to do. And if you don't do what they tell you to do, sometimes you can be arrested, or prosecuted, taken to prison, who knows. So the authorities would include the police. It would include your political leaders that you elected. Here in Taiwan, it would include your legislative yuan. People like that. They're the authorities. So they've been using these cute little clams that we're talking about to monitor, which just means to watch something to see if it changes, make sure everything's okay. But they've been using clams to monitor the water quality there.
Indeed, and I did want to mention the word authorities here is the plural form. If it's the singular form, then that's referring to power in general, okay? So maybe you've got police officers from Kaohsiung coming up to Taipei to try to arrest someone, and the Taipei police will say, hey, you guys can't do that. You don't have authority here. You don't have power here because you're not from Taipei. This is just an example. I actually don't really know how the police work here in Taiwan. But yeah, you might have a certain kind of power in a certain place. That's your authority. But here we're talking about specific persons.
They're
here.
People, yeah,
the people who are in charge of the water systems here in this city in Poland. And they've been using clams to monitor, to check on the water quality for a very, very long time, since the year 1994. So clams are being described here as creatures, living things. So these creatures are ideal for the task because they respond immediately and noticeably to water contamination. So yes, the task here, or the challenge that they have to meet, is to keep the water pure, or to monitor the water to make sure it's pure, and then to find out if it's not pure, if it's contaminated or polluted. And, well, clams seem to be the perfect candidate for this job. They're ideal because they can respond right away, immediately, and also they respond noticeably. It's not subtle at all. They can see it very clearly. That's what noticeable means, something that you can tell.
Right. Instead of calling them creatures, you could also just refer to them as shellfish, because they are shellfish. But yeah, they're amazing. It's very noticeable. It's not something that's hiding from you. You don't have to really pay close attention to see it. And they respond to water contamination. Contamination means that the water has been polluted in some way. There's something in the water that makes it unclean. Yeah, you need to watch out for contamination. So these clams keep their shells open to expose themselves to nutrients.If they're happy, their shell is open because they're getting nutrients from the water. And everybody needs nutrients to grow. People, animals, plants, we all need them. But they close their shell very tightly when they can detect toxic substances. Toxic is another word for poisonous. So if you're facing something and someone says, "Oh, it's toxic. Don't eat it. Don't touch it." It just means it's poisonous and it can hurt you. Sometimes some toxins can actually lead to death. A toxin is the noun form. Toxic is an adjective.
Indeed, and this sort of reminds me of the canaries in coal mines. It's kind of similar if you take a canary or a bird inside a coal mine, and if it dies, that means there's some kind of poison in the air. So
or
all
not
the
enough
workers,
oxygen, huh?
Yeah, there's no oxygen or something like that, so they all have to get out of there.
Wow.
So it's kind of similar, at least to me. That sounds very similar here. In this case, they're using clams to monitor the quality of the water. Okay, that brings us to the midway point in today's lesson. Let's take a break now and listen to our Chinese teacher.
Hi everyone, my name is Jenny. 今天我们要看的是第11单元。好，这篇文章呢非常的有趣，因为呢，其实大自然界里面，生物本身也可以帮我们做很多事哦，比如说帮我们监测水质。没错，这个地方的主角，这篇文章的主角就是 clams 蛤蜊。为什么它可以帮我们监测水质呢？我们来看下面的说明。这篇文章就提到了，大家都想喝干净的水。那因为呢，像在水库啦，或雨水充沛啦，资金够的国家，大概我们都知道，好像自然而然，我们每天都应该会有饮用水，自由流动的饮用水。的确，我们都是把这些事情当作理所当然的。Take for granted. 好，那可是呢，我们知道，这些资源，如果说它没有这些资源的话，资金比较不够，那你可能就很难提供给大家这样子的生活必需品了。好，注意到这个字 necessity。necessity 这个字当名词来用，就是指基本的必需品。好，我们来看。今天的文章其实我们要来看一个国家叫波兰。波兰这里呢，它有一个城市，这里它的确它有独特的资源问题，而他们的问题也解决方式也非常的独特。好，我们来看这边就说了，这里呀，它从1994年以来，它监测水质都是靠 clams。蛤蜊。好，这一句话其实要注意的是它的时态，因为呢，这个时态 have been using clams， 这个是所谓的现在完成再加进行。现在完成进行式的使用，当然我们要了解，这跟后面提到的从哪一个时间点 since 1994 since再加一个时间的起点，然后呢，你在句子里面就是指从那一点到现在为止，所以基本上我们会用现在完成式。不过如果你再加上进行式，像这边的 have been using， 那你要知道它的意思就是说，到讲话的这个时候，它其实还是这样的，也就是一直以来都是如此。所以从1994年开始，一直以来呢，这个地方在波兰，他们呢都是怎么样处理水质呢？用蛤蜊。那我们来看怎么样用蛤蜊来监测水质。他说到，其实 clams 很适合做这样子的工作，因为只要一有污染的话呢，它就会做出很明显的反应。蛤蜊它其实会 如果说它是在养分当中，它是会打开的。好，如果是暴露于养分中，这里一个动词 expose 也是一样，它后面的介系词 to expose themselves to。好，跟 respond 一样，在英文里面介系词的用法要特别注意。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. We're talking about some research that is new to me, but it's something that the people in at least Poland's been trying to use for a while or have been using successfully for a while. They've been using these little clams to help keep their water safe or clean for drinking. And we talked about how these little shellfish, which is what clams are, they are really good because they respond to any sort of pollution in the water by closing their shells very quickly. So if they're unhappy, boy, they just shut their shells ASAP. And it's very noticeable to people who are watching. They're not small. They're pretty big, shellfish. And so they've put some sensors on them. We're going to find out how the scientists use this natural creature to help them keep the water, safe for drinking, at least in Poland. It's really a clever thing.
Okay, so moving on now to the next paragraph. The Poznan water treatment facility keeps 8 clams glued to a surface within the water pumps, with springs attached to the tops of their shells. So again, this is the water treatment facility, this particular building with the pipes and the water and stuff like that. They've got 8 clams there. And they keep the 8 clams glued to a surface within the water pumps. So the clams are inside the water pumps, and they're glued to a surface so they don't wash away. They stay there. And then they've got springs attached to the tops of their shells. So remember, a clam has 2 shells, the top one and the bottom one. So they've got a spring attached to the top shell there. A spring, of course, is a piece of metal that's in a coil shape there. So, of course, you've got springs in your mattress, perhaps, or springs in a chair or something like that. So yes, we've got springs there on the top of the shells, I guess, to either monitor the shells opening and closing, or to pull them open, or to shut them, or whatever.
So when a shell closes, the spring makes contact with a sensor. That's technology. That's not natural. So that sensor then can send an alert or a signal of some kind to engineers who are keeping track, who are monitoring this stuff. So an alert. An alert here is a noun, and it just means some sort of message of warning. So I know in my car, if my car was running low on oil, my dashboard would have a little red alert signal that would go on when I needed to put some oil in my car. I was so dumb about cars, Tom, when I was 16, that I didn't realize that you had to keep putting oil in the engine. That was a little surprising to me. My dad was like, Steph, wake up. But I didn't know anything about cars. I had no interest in cars.
Well, the pistons move up and down in the cylinders rather quickly, so you need to have oil in there to lubricate them, and that oil wears out and you need to replace it. But that's another subject here. What we've got here is springs attached to the tops of those shells, and when the shell when it closes, it activates a sensor, so then they know something's going on, and there's an alert there, or an alarm, which is sent to the engineers. And when 4 or more clams close at once, the supply is shut off. So yes, the clams are closing there, which is an indication that the water is polluted, or the water is contaminated. And so yes, thanks to the clams, they know something's wrong there, And while the clams are not the only safeguard in the operation, the facility considers this form of biological monitoring a reliable addition to their modern systems. So yeah, they don't rely 100% on the clams. They've got other systems in there, other kinds of sensors that will detect contamination. So it's not the only safeguard. Here we've got the word safeguard, which is some sort of protection here to make sure there are no problems. Yeah, but the clams are not the only safeguard in the operation, and the operation is just the general process in which all these things are done. How the pumps operate, where the water goes, how much water goes in there, it's all part of the operation.
It's pretty amazing. Guys, if you're in business, we don't say business operation. We always use the plural for that. Yeah. How are you, the business operations our operations are going smoothly. You don't say my operation is going smoothly. That's weird. Unless you're having surgery done on you in a hospital by a surgeon. Yeah, so anyway, this facility considers this form of biological monitoring a reliable addition. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. They have natural systems to try to keep their water clean, and they're also using smart, high-tech ways as well. So this is because other technology the facility uses isn't always efficient enough to respond to the exceptional types of pollution found in its primary water source, which is the Varta River. So they must have some really unique or kind of weird, I could say, pollution that comes into their water that other countries perhaps don't have to deal with. Who knows? Every place is different. If it's exceptional, it doesn't necessarily mean good. It just means something that is unusual and isn't found everywhere. So it's unusual, it's not typical. But if you could say she's exceptionally good, that of course is good because you've added that word good after exceptional. Or someone can be exceptionally gifted, exceptionally talented. Those are all positive. So yeah, exceptional types of pollution, that's probably not a positive. That's probably a negative thing. Very interesting.
Indeed, so that's what they're doing. They're working with the Varta River there, and the Varta passes through some of Poland's oldest industrial areas and has had chemicals and other forms of pollution leaking into its waters since the 1800s. So indeed, there are a lot of factories in this part of Poland along this river. So of course, as you know, factories tend to pollute rivers if the government isn't monitoring them or if the government doesn't have restrictions and things like that. So yes, lots of chemicals and other forms of pollution have been leaking or flowing into the waters of the Varta River for a very long time, since the 1800s. And the most disturbing concern relates to heavy metals, which continue to seep through the ground and into Poznan's water supply. So here, if we're talking about heavy metals, we're not talking about, Tool or Guns N' Roses or bands like that.
Rock and roll.
We're talking about metals, kinds of metal like lead and things like that, that are harmful to the environment.
Or they can kill people if you have too many metals in your water, so be careful. To seep just means to go through very slowly, to seep in. It's usually a word we use with liquids moving through the ground, or if you have plants at home, if you water them, it will seep into the dirt. So depending on conditions, the water quality can go from drinkable to poisonous throughout the year. They have a big span there, you could say. A few years ago, the main treatment plant in Poland's capital, Warsaw, began harnessing the clam's special abilities too. If you harness something, just means you use something so that it benefits you. We put harnesses on horses in order to ride them, in order to control them. So you're controlling something when you use harness as a verb. To harness or control the clam's special abilities. Smart stuff.
Yeah, we could say solar panels harness the power of the sun, for example.
True.
And the U.S. cities of Minneapolis and Moline are also experimenting with this approach to water monitoring. It's kind of interesting because Minneapolis and Moline are both on the Mississippi River. Minneapolis, of course, is in Minnesota, and Moline is in Illinois. It's one of the quad cities there with Davenport, Bettendorf, and Rock Island there.
Wow.
Maybe you've heard of it. It's kind of near Chicago. And yes, they're using this approach to water monitoring. Again, using those clams to make sure the water is not contaminated. And this animal's usefulness seems to demonstrate that despite our high-tech achievements, humankind will always retain a fundamental connection with nature. So yes, indeed, the usefulness of these clams seems to demonstrate or seems to show us that even though we have this great technology, we still need to rely on nature. Humankind will always retain a fundamental connection with nature. Retain just means to keep something.
Yeah, continue to have something or keep possession of. I think it's important that all of us are sharing this beautiful earth together, and we need to watch out for each other. Humans and animals and plants. We need to make sure we're all working together to have a good life. So this is really important stuff. I love this research. We're going to listen to our Chinese teacher one more time, and then we'll be back to wrap up.
好，我们接下来看，在这个城市里呢，他们怎么用 clams 来帮他们做水质的监测。好，他提到，当然这个很细节了哦。他提到说，怎么样让8个蛤蜊呢，然后让它粘在这个帮浦上面的表面，然后还装了弹簧。然后你知道，蛤蜊如果它关上的时候，它会让那个弹簧呢接触的地方，跟那个感应器连在一起，然后就会发送警报。所以这就表示，这个水质其实是有污染的。那尤其他说到，如果有4只还是更多的蛤蜊同时关上，哇，那这边的供应它就会马上水的供应马上关闭。好，我们提到这些系统，然后它后面还继续再加以说明。那这个系统当然并不是唯一的，它还有别的防护装置哦。好，那我们这边呢，再往下看，就看到了说，在这个地方，他们作为饮用水这个河流呢，其实流经了波兰的一些工业区，而这些工业区呢，因为他们有废水，然后呢会流到这条他们饮用水的水域里。接下来继续，他就说到了。其中呢，我们要晓得最令人担忧的，其实呢，和有一些重金属有关。下一段里，他提到了在波兰的首都这边的污水处理厂，他们在几年前也开始用 clams 蛤蜊这种的特殊能力来作为水质监测。好，而且呢，我们要晓得这样子的方法似乎在美国他们都觉得不妨试试哦。好，注意到了吗？这边又有一个搭配词提到这样的方式 this approach 什么？它后面的搭配词也是 to 哦，也就是说是对某一种事情的处理方法。好，我们今天的讲解就到这边结束，我们下次见。
That brings us to the end of our lesson for today. Thank you so much for joining us. And next time you have some clams, think about what they can do to detect water pollution. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.